Montana Territory, 1882. The snow had not yet melted from the ridges above Fort Benton when Boone Lark rode out of the canyon with blood on his sleeve, and a scowl set deep enough to split stone. He had not meant to stop. He never meant to stop, but the sound of a child crying tore through the trees like a gunshot. Boone reined in his gelding. His jaw tightened. He heard it again, high, scared, and too close to ignore. "Stay," he muttered to the horse, dismounting. He moved toward the sound, hand on the revolver at his hip. The trail narrowed, snow crunching under his boots. A broken wagon leaned sideways off the trail, one wheel shattered. A woman knelt in the dirt beside it, her hands tight around two small children. She was breathing hard, lips trembling. The boy looked about 9, arms wrapped around a bundle of patched blankets. The girl couldn't have been older than 6. Her cheeks were red from cold and crying. Boone's voice came out low. "You folks in some kind of trouble?" The woman's head snapped up. She looked ready to bolt. Her eyes, set wide in a pale, dirt-smudged face, landed on the blood on his sleeve. "I was hunting," Boone said quickly. "It's not mine." She hesitated. "They left us," she said. Her voice cracked. "We were headed to Great Falls with a freight group. My husband was supposed to meet us there, but the teamster got tired of waiting, left us here 3 days ago." Boone frowned. "He left you like this?" "I begged him to stay another day. He said it was not his problem." She lowered her eyes. "We have not eaten since yesterday morning." Boone looked at the children. The boy was staring at him, fiercely protective. The girl was shivering. "You got a name?" he asked the woman. She stood slowly, brushing snow from her skirt. "Celia Orwood," she said. "These are my children, Lyle and Liza." Boone nodded once. "Well, Celia Orwood, you can freeze to death out here or you can come with me. I am headed back to my cabin. Nearest town is too far and your wagon's no good." Celia's mouth opened, but she said nothing. "I have food," he added. "And blankets." She looked at her children. Lyle nodded once, like a man twice his age. Celia turned back to Boone and gave a single sharp nod. "All right," she said. "We will come." Boone led them back to his horse. It took 3 trips to carry them all, one child in front of him and one behind, while Celia walked beside him in silence. She did not complain once, not even when the wind picked up and the snow started to fall harder. The cabin sat low in a wooded hollow, smoke already curling from the chimney. Boone helped Liza down, then reached for Lyle, who refused help and slid off on his own. He turned back to Celia. She looked at the cabin like she was not sure it was real. "It is warm inside," Boone said. "And safe." Celia nodded. "Thank you." They stepped in. Heat flooded over them. Celia's shoulders dropped a little. Lyle went straight to the hearth while Liza pressed her face against the log wall like she could not believe it would hold. Boone stirred the stew that had been simmering since before dawn. "It is deer and potato. Not much else, but it is hot." Celia glanced at the pot. "We are grateful." Boone served the children first. Liza looked up at him with wide eyes before whispering, "Thank you." He paused, unsure what to say, so he just nodded. Celia ate last, her hands trembling slightly as she brought the spoon to her lips. Boone sat across the table watching them. It had been years since he had shared a room with anyone, let alone a woman and 2 small children. "You have family out here?" he asked. Celia shook her head. "None nearby. I grew up in Virginia. My husband went west last year to find work, said he would send for us once he settled. We waited, but nothing came. So I hired onto a freight team, hoping to find him in Great Falls." "He never wrote." "No," she said. "Not once." Boone frowned. "Then he is not worth finding." Celia looked down. "I know." That night Boone gave them his bed. He took the floor near the fire and lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the ceiling. He tried not to think about the way Celia's face had changed when she looked at her children, soft, tired, but strong. He tried not to think about the way she had thanked him with her eyes more than her mouth. He had spent most of his life pushing people away. Love was a story folks told themselves so they would not feel alone. That was what he believed, still believed, mostly. But the sound of Lisa's soft breathing and the way Celia had tucked the blanket around her kids made something shift in him, just a little. The next day, Boone hitched up his spare mule and rode back to the broken wagon. He salvaged what he could: blankets, a small chest, a few books, and brought them back. Celia was waiting on the porch when he returned. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Boone replied. She helped him unload. Her hand brushed his once and lingered. Boone stepped back, unsure what to do with the warmth that moved through his chest. That night, Celia cooked a simple meal while the children read near the fire. Boone sat at the table, watching her move. Her sleeves were rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She smiled once, just for a second, and it hit him like a punch to the ribs. He stood and walked outside, needing the cold. He leaned against the porch post, staring into the trees. He did not believe in love. He did not. But when she stepped onto the porch and stood beside him, quiet and close, he did not move away. "You do not talk much," she said. "No, that is all right. I talk enough for both of us." He glanced at her, then looked away. She paused. "Thank you for feeding us. For giving us shelter, for going back for our things." Boone's throat went tight. He did not speak. Celia stepped closer. She leaned forward, softly resting her head against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. And Boone Lark, who had never believed in love, who had kept his heart locked behind years of silence and scars, felt something crack open inside his ribs. He wrapped his arms around her without thinking, held her there, in the cold, under the stars. And for the first time in his life, Boone wondered if maybe love was real after all. The snow softened over the next 2 days, melting into the muddy seams of the hollow. Boone split firewood beneath a sky the color of dull pewter, heavy with the weight of late winter. He worked steady, boots sinking into thawing ground, axe biting clean into pine. Each swing helped still the restless thing inside him, a thing stirred by the sound of Celia's voice as she read aloud to the children, slow and low by the hearth. That evening, Celia stood beside the stove, sleeves pinned back with bone buttons. Her fingers moved with quiet purpose as she wrapped damp clothes in a dry sheet and hung them near the warmth. Boone watched from the table, his coffee going cold in his hand. "You always live alone out here?" she asked, not turning. "I do." She hung the last cloth and faced him. "That by choice or by circumstance?" Boone set the tin cup down. "Both." Celia looked at him a moment longer, then crossed to the cupboard. "I found a jar of beans back behind the flour. And there's some salt pork left," he nodded. "Take what you need. I was thinking to stretch it into a soup. It'll hold us a few more days. You cook better than I do." "That's not saying much," she said, and her mouth curved in a slow smile, one that touched her eyes this time. Boone looked down, the corners of his mouth twitching despite himself. "Fair enough." That night, the wind picked up again. Boone laid out his bedroll near the door, same as before. Celia knelt by the fire, tucking Lisa under a quilt while Lyle curled into the crook of his arm, already half asleep. She stood slowly, brushing her palms against her skirts, and turned toward Boone. "You have a plan for us?" she asked, quiet. Boone met her gaze. "Not yet," Celia nodded. "I'll find work when we get to Great Falls. Sewing, maybe, or laundry. I've done both." "You'll manage," Boone said. "You've got steel in you," her eyes flickered. "Don't always feel like it. You don't have to feel it. It's there." Celia crossed the room, her steps careful in the low light. She stopped near his bedroll and hesitated. "You think we might stay a little longer?" Boone didn't answer right away. "You don't need to ask." She looked at the door, then back at him. I do. He sat up, elbows on his knees. You and the children are safe here as long as you need it. A long breath left her. Boone cleared his throat. You ever shoot? Celia blinked. What? You ever handle a rifle? Or a pistol? No, she said. My father didn't believe in women carrying. Then I'll teach you, Boone said. You should know how. Celia studied him. Why? Because no one should have to depend on a man who might not stay. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned back toward the fire, her shoulders drawn. The next morning, Boone took her out past the ridge, where the trees thinned and the sky opened wide over the slope. He handed her his old Colt, the cylinder cold in her hand. It's heavier than I thought, she said, adjusting her grip. He stepped behind her, careful not to crowd. Keep your elbows easy, don't lock your arms. You'll feel the pull before the shot. Celia lifted the revolver, sighting down the barrel. Her breath fogged in the morning air. Go on, Boone said. The first shot missed the stump by a foot. She flinched but didn't drop it. Boone said nothing, just waited. The second shot clipped bark. By the fifth, she hit it square. She lowered the gun and turned, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Well, she said, that's something. Boone took the pistol back, reloaded it without a word. Celia tilted her head. You don't talk much, but you watch everything. I don't see the use in wasting words. No, she said, but you notice things, like when Lisa was favoring her foot. You brought her that thick pair of socks from your trunk without saying a word. Boone looked away, shrugging. Celia stepped closer. You pretend you're hard as old pine, but I see through it. He met her eyes. That right? It is. They walked back in silence. Boone carried the pistol. Celia kept her hands tucked into her sleeves, her eyes on the trail ahead. Just before the rise to the cabin, she paused. Boone. He stopped beside her. I'm not used to kindness with no price. He didn't move. I'm not offering any price. She nodded once and kept walking. That night, the soup simmered long. Lyle carved a bit of wood into something like a bird. Lisa fell asleep before her second spoonful. Boone sat by the fire, the Colt freshly cleaned and resting on a rag near his boot. Celia stood from the table and came over, quiet. Her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed, steady and sure. You were right, she murmured. About learning to shoot, it felt like having breath again. Boone looked up at her. There was something in her face, something that wasn't just gratitude. He reached out slow and took her hand. She let him, and neither one spoke as the fire crackled low and the wind settled against the logs like an old friend come home. By the fifth morning, the children had begun to explore the hollow as if it belonged to them. Lyle took to carving shapes into the bark of a fallen pine, while Lisa collected bits of moss and pine cones in a worn apron Boone had found tucked behind the stove. Celia had aired out the quilts and scrubbed the window glass until it caught the light clean. She moved with a kind of quiet confidence now, the sort that came from knowing no one would knock her off her feet without warning. Boone noticed it when she tied her hair back with a plain piece of twine and asked if she could help mend the barn roof. He'd meant to do it before winter but hadn't found the will. Now, with the snow receding and Celia standing beside him with a hammer in one hand and a length of cedar shingles in the other, it seemed like time had caught up to him. You ever built a roof? He asked, eyeing her boots in the frost-softened mud. No, she said, but I've patched enough floorboards and lifted enough children to know how to keep my balance. Boone passed her a nail. All right. Just don't fall through. They worked in rhythm, the hammering slow and even. Celia didn't complain when the wind picked up or when her sleeves soaked through. She asked questions about spacing and pitch, not out of politeness, but because she wanted to do it right. Boone found himself answering more than he expected. About the way water ran off the slope, how to angle a shingle against the grain, how to keep the nails from splitting the wood. Around mid-afternoon, she straightened and rolled her shoulders, watching the trees. "It's quiet out here," she said. "A different kind, not empty." Boone set the hammer down. "Let's take a rest." They climbed down and sat on the edge of the porch, boots brushing the thawing dirt. The children were out of sight, but he could hear Lisa's voice somewhere deeper in the trees, high and contented. "How long have you lived here?" Celia asked. 8 years this past fall." "Ever get tired of the silence?" "No," Boone said. "I came looking for it." She didn't press, just nodded and picked at a splinter on her palm. He shifted. "You said you were from Virginia." "I was born in Shenandoah," she said. "We had a small boarding house. My mother ran it. After she passed, I kept it going a while. Then I married and everything shifted. He didn't care for the work or the place." Boone looked at her hands. The skin was worn raw in places, but her grip had never faltered on the roof. "He ever raise a hand to you?" he asked flat. "No," she said. "But he left us hungry more than once." Boone nodded slowly. "That's still a kind of harm." Celia looked straight ahead. "I expected more from him." "I think that's what hurt worst." Boone didn't speak. The wind rustled the bare branches above them. She turned to him. "You ever lose someone?" He didn't answer right away. "My brother." Her eyes softened. "What happened?" "Rail accident near Bozeman. He was working freight. They said it was quick. I was too far to come in time." Celia didn't reach for him, didn't offer words that would be too small for the weight. She just sat beside him, steady and quiet, like she understood that some griefs didn't leave room for comfort. As the sun dipped low, the children came running back, cheeks red and breathless. Lyle held a crooked stick like a rifle, and Lisa had made a crown of dried grass. Boone stood and nodded toward the cabin. "Go on in. I'll bring wood." Celia lingered a moment. "You always carry everything alone." He paused, looking at the stack of kindling. "Seems easier than explaining it to someone else." "Maybe," she said, "but it doesn't make it lighter." Boone didn't reply. She stepped past him, brushing his arm with hers. It was the smallest touch, but it carried weight. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Boone sat by the fire sharpening a blade. Celia stood at the table, folding the last of the mended linens. The silence between them had changed, no longer wary, but waiting. She turned to him. "You know, I never believed I'd feel steady again." Boone met her eyes. "You are." Celia crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, the fire casting soft light across her face. "I think I needed someone to see me that way." Boone set the blade down slowly. "I do." She stepped closer. He rose to meet her. "I don't expect you to promise anything," she said. "But if there's room here for more than one kind of life." "There is," he said, voice low. Celia reached up, hand resting against his chest. Her voice was barely a breath. "Thank you." Boone wrapped his arms around her, holding her against him like she belonged there, like she'd always belonged there. The air in the room shifted, quieter, fuller. For a man who had never believed in love, Boone Lark stood in his cabin with a woman pressed to his chest and knew, without question, that he would never be alone again. The days pulled longer as March leaned into April, and the air no longer bit quite so sharply before dawn. In the hollow, the creek behind the cabin had broken through its ice skin, running quick through the trees like it had somewhere to be. Celia stood beside it one morning, her skirts tucked up to her shins, scrubbing a shirt against the washboard Boone had unearthed from the cellar. She worked with her jaw set, sleeves damp to the elbow. As the cold water stung her hands, Boone watched from a distance, leaning against a cedar trunk with a length of rope coiled over his shoulder. He was meant to be walking fence lines, checking for winter damage, but something about the way Celia moved, deliberate, unflinching, held him still. She looked up once and caught him watching. "You planning to stand there all morning, or are you going to hand me that soap?" He stepped forward and passed her the sliver of lye, careful not to let their fingers touch. She didn't miss the hesitation. "You act like I'll shatter," she said, eyes on the fabric. "You don't have to." He knelt beside her. "I don't aim to break what's already holding more than it should. I've been holding things a long time, Boone. I don't need gentling. I need honesty." He tied the rope between two trees and sat back on his heels. "There's not much I'm good at saying." "Then show me," she said, rinsing the shirt and wringing it out hard enough to make her knuckles flare white. "I'm not asking for words you don't have. Just don't pull away when things get close." He didn't answer, but he didn't move either. She stood and hung the shirt on the line, the fabric dripping cold against her skirt. By mid-afternoon, Lyle had taken up the task of oiling Boone's extra saddle. He sat cross-legged in the sun near the barn, rubbing the leather with a scrap of wool and asking questions about stirrups and cinches. Boone, crouched beside him, answered simply, pointing out wear patterns and how to check for dry rot. "You ever break a horse?" Lyle asked, squinting. "More than a few." "Think I could." Boone studied him. "Not yet. But you've got the right kind of patience." Lyle grinned, and Boone felt something stir in his chest he hadn't let himself want before. It was strange how easily the boy fit into the rhythm of things. Not soft, not loud, just steady. Inside, Celia was stitching a new strap for her daughter's shoe. Lisa sat on the floor, humming off-key and brushing a cornhusk doll's hair with a twig. Celia's fingers moved with practiced speed through the leather. She glanced up when Boone entered. "Lyle said you told him he had patience," she said. "He does. I've never seen him that still." Boone leaned against the doorframe. "He listens when it matters. That's more than most grown men do." Celia looked at the thread in her needle. "You've taken to him." He crossed the room, setting his gloves on the table. "I didn't plan to." "I didn't plan to stay," she said. Neither of them moved. She set the shoe down. "I've been thinking. Once the weather holds, I'd like to start a little garden. There's space out back. Nothing big, just some beans, onions maybe. I know how to keep weeds down." "There's seed in the loft," Boone said. "Left from last year, should still be good. Can I use it?" He nodded. "It's yours now." She looked up slowly. "That's a kind thing to say." "I don't say things I don't mean." She stood and walked to him, hands loose at her sides. "I know that. That's why I trust you." He met her eyes. "You do." "I do," she said. "And I want more than borrowed shelter. I want a life that doesn't feel like waiting." Boone stepped in, close enough to feel the heat where her arm brushed his. "I don't know how to be what you might need." "I'm not asking for anything you don't already give," she said. "Quiet, steady, honest care." He hesitated. "I've spent years thinking I was better off alone." "Were you?" Boone looked at her hand resting near his. Then he reached out and took it. "No." She leaned into him, their foreheads touching, breath warm between them. And in that still moment, with the fire low and the cabin full of soft sounds and quiet hearts, Boone Lark let go of the last piece of the man he had been. They didn't speak again that night, not with words. But Boone sat beside her on the porch long after the children had gone to sleep, their hands twined, the air sweet with thawing earth. He didn't need to say it. She already knew. And when the stars came out, silent and sharp above the trees, they stayed like that together and still, no longer waiting for the world to change, but building something inside it that already had. The land had begun to green at the edges. Shoots of wild onion pushed up through last year's deadfall, and the creek behind the cabin ran louder now, swollen with meltwater. Boone stood at the edge of the field behind the barn, sleeves rolled to his elbows, turning soil with a rusted spade. Celia knelt several paces away, pressing her thumb into the earth and dropping seeds in neat, careful rows. "Your back's going to give out before we get halfway through," she called without looking up. Boone shifted his grip. "I've turned this field alone every spring for 8 years. I think I'll manage one more." She straightened, brushing dirt from her knees. "Not alone this time." He didn't answer, but the line of his shoulders eased slightly. Lisa sat nearby on a faded quilt with a tin pail of creek water and a bundle of damp cloth. She was washing the cornhusk doll's dress with great seriousness, tongue caught in the corner of her mouth. Lyle was perched atop the fence post behind her, watching a hawk wheel over the ridge. Boone stopped digging long enough to glance at Celia. "You ever think about staying?" She looked up at him, brow lifting just a little. "I thought that's what I'd been doing." He set the spade against the fence. "I mean permanent." Celia stood slowly, brushing her skirt. "This place needs work. The chimney smokes when the wind's wrong, and the barn roof leaks in 2 corners. I know. The children need schooling, and I want a proper table that doesn't rock when someone leans on it." Boone crossed to her, wiping his palms on his trousers. "We can fix all of that." She tilted her head, watching him. "And what about us?" "I want you here," he said, "not just for a season." Celia studied his face. "Then say it plain." He took her hand, the one still smudged with soil. "I want you to be my wife." She blinked once, then nodded. "All right." Boone let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Celia looked over at the cabin. "We'll need a bed that fits, too, and I won't sleep on the side with the cold draft. You can have whichever side you want." She smiled, small and deep. "That's a fine start." They married beneath a cottonwood at the edge of the field, with nothing but the hush of wind and 2 wide-eyed children watching from a blanket. Boone wore a clean shirt with the collar stiff from starch, and Celia had stitched a pale ribbon into her hair. Lyle held a Bible he'd found in the crate of books Boone had salvaged from the broken wagon, and read a verse Boone had picked out himself, hands steady. Afterward, Celia kissed Boone on the cheek, then square on the mouth, and said, "Now we'll see if you can learn to share the blanket." He only nodded, too full to speak. Summer pressed in slow and warm. Boone added another beam to the porch roof and built a crude bench from old fence rails. Celia lined the windowsills with jars of herbs and a sprig of wild mint. Lyle carved a whistle for Lisa, and they played beneath the trees while the sun leaned long through the branches. One evening, Boone came in with a splinter in his palm. Celia sat him at the table, running her fingers gently over the skin. "You're worse than Lyle about wearing gloves," she said. "You always say that like it's a bad thing." She used the tip of a needle to ease the splinter free, then pressed a clean cloth to his hand. "You're softer than you were," she said. Boone raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell the mule. I mean your eyes. You don't flinch when I touch you now." He looked at her, then at their joined hands. "I stopped waiting for you to leave. I stopped thinking I had to." They shared the bed now, narrow as it was. Boone often woke with her hair against his collarbone, her breath warm against his ribs. Lisa curled on a cot beside the hearth, and Lyle had taken over Boone's old bed, proud of the responsibility it seemed to carry. They spoke of building on a room come fall. Boone had plans drawn in the dirt behind the barn, and Celia had already chosen where she wanted the window to face. She said a morning sun was worth more than gold if it came through glass, and Boone believed her. Years later, neighbors would speak of them with quiet respect, the quiet man who had once kept to himself, and the woman who brought spring with her hands. They would say the hollow had changed when she moved in, that Boone Lark had softened around the edges, though none dared say it to his face. But within the cabin, there was no need for stories. There was only the slow rhythm of shared days of mended fences, warm bread, and the hush of 2 people who had nothing to prove and everything to keep. One evening, as the first frost clung to the grass and the fire burned low, Celia lay with her head on Boone's chest, listening to the steady beat beneath his ribs. "You still think love's something folks tell themselves to feel less alone?" she asked. Boone ran a hand through her hair. "No. And what do you think it is now?" He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "It's this." She pulled the blanket higher and closed her eyes. And in the hollow, where the wind moved quiet between the trees and the earth held the warmth of two steady hearts, Boone and Celia Lark lived on together, and whole and home.